It all began with a hole in the ground, in the rolling hills of southwestern France, just outside the sleepy village of Montignac. For teenagers and their dog were wandering the woods. It was 1940. War was sweeping across Europe, but in this quiet countryside, adventure still beckoned. The boys were exploring as kids do, poking around the forest floor when they noticed something odd, a small depression beneath a fallen tree. The ground seemed to breathe cold air, like a whisper from underground. Their curiosity got the better of them. They returned the next day with ropes and lamps, descending one by one into the earth. What they found would rewrite human history. At first, the flickering lamplight revealed narrow stone passage, just the natural belly of a limestone hill. But soon, the boys reached a chamber. As their eyes adjusted, they froze. The walls were alive. There were animals everywhere. Ear horses, bulls, dozens of them, painted in ochre, black, red, and yellow. Some seemed to gallop across the rock. Others stood frozen, watching. These weren't crude scribbles. They were art, deliberate, dynamic, and utterly mesmerizing. The boys had accidentally uncovered what would become known as the Lascaux Cave, often called the Sistine Chapel of prehistory, and they were among the first modern humans to lay eyes on its contents in over 17,000 years. Let that sink in. These paintings predate the pyramids, Stonehenge, even agriculture itself. But here's what's most shocking. The people who painted these weren't primitive cavemen in the way we've often imagined. Their work displayed nuance, emotion, rhythm, movement, perspective. In some places, the walls had been intentionally carved or shaped to give certain animals a sense of volume, as if the artists were sculptors, not just painters. So, who were these mysterious painters? Let's rewind, because the cave itself holds more than paint. It holds clues. Archaeologists believe that the Lascaux Cave was first decorated around 17,000 to 20,000 years ago, during the Upper Paleolithic period. At the time, Europe was gripped by an ice age. The climate was harsh, the terrain treacherous. These early humans lived in small, mobile groups, hunting reindeer, bison, and horses across the frozen plains. But despite the daily struggle to survive, they made time to descend deep into the earth and create beauty. Lascaux wasn't a shelter. It wasn't lived in. There were no hearths, no sleeping spaces, no evidence of daily life. That raises a question. Why go into a cold, dark, dangerous cave just to paint? Some scientists believe the answer is spiritual. Picture this. You're a Paleolithic hunter. You believe the world is full of spirits, animal spirits, perhaps ancestors, maybe gods. The cave, in this mindset, isn't just a place. It's a portal. A threshold between the world of the living and something else. Descending into the dark, you bring fire. Shadows dance across the walls. The flickering light makes the painted animals appear to move. Was this a kind of ritual theater? A hunt before the hunt? Or maybe a conversation with the unseen? Let's pause here for a moment. Imagine being one of those teenagers in 1940. You've slid down a narrow shaft into a place untouched for millennia. You're surrounded by ghostly animals, the air thick with dust and silence. It must have felt like walking into another world, one where time bent, and the boundary between the living and the dead dissolved. But the boys didn't keep it a secret. News of the discovery spread quickly. By the end of the 1940s, Lascaux had become a sensation. Thousands flocked to see the artwork, marveling at the sophistication of our Ice Age ancestors. Unfortunately, all that human attention came at a cost. By the 1950s, scientists began to notice something strange. Greenish spots on the walls, then black mold, then flaking pigment. The cave was dying. Human breath, body heat, carbon dioxide, and even bacteria on people's skin were changing the delicate environment. The once pristine images were starting to ironically damaged by admiration. In 1963, Lascaux was closed to the public. Only scientists could enter, and even they had to wear protective gear. Later, a full-scale replica Lascaux was built nearby so visitors could still experience the magic without harming the original. It was a hard lesson. Sometimes our desire to witness history puts it at risk. But Lascaux is only the beginning. After its discovery, similar caves began to emerge across Europe. Altamira in Spain, Chauvet in France, Cosca near the Mediterranean coast, where part of the entrance now lies underwater. Each cave brought new surprises. In Chauvet, for instance, found in 1994, the artwork was even older, over 30,000 years old. The paintings there are breathtaking. Lions, rhinos, bears, animals rarely seen in later art. What's remarkable is that these weren't isolated cases. Across the continent, from the Pyrenees to the Ural Mountains, early humans were painting, and not just painting, thinking, expressing, feeling. This wasn't just survival, it was culture. And yet, the mystery deepens. Let's zoom in on the symbols. Beyond the animals, many caves feature geometric markings, spirals, zigzags, ladders, hand stencils. These are older than the figurative art and appear more consistently from cave to cave. In fact, archaeologist Genevieve von Petzinger catalogued 32 recurring symbols found across European caves. What's odd is that these symbols appear in regions far apart, often separated by thousands of years. So how did these patterns spread? Were they part of a proto-language, a visual code passed down across generations? Or were they independently invented, meaning different groups reached the same symbolic solutions on their own? Either way, it suggests something profound. Symbolic thinking was not rare. It was fundamental to who we were in tens of thousands of years ago. Still, many skeptics in the early 20th century dismissed cave art. They couldn't believe primitive people were capable of such artistry. Some accused the discoverers of forgery. Others suggested the art was random, mere decoration, not meaning. But over time, those views crumbled under evidence. Pigments were analyzed. Tools were carbon dated. Cave floors revealed footprints, some of children, walking alongside adults. Fossilized torches were found. Ancient scaffolding marks appeared on the walls. All of it pointed to the same conclusion. These people meant what they painted, and here's a moment to reflect. We often talk about history starting with writing cuneiform in Mesopotamia, hieroglyphs in Egypt. But what if that's only part of the story? What if caves were the first libraries, the first archives of human thought? Not in letters or words, but in shapes, colors, and patterns that reached into the future. They weren't just drawing animals. They were remembering them, honoring them, teaching about them, maybe even dreaming about them. Now, let's go back to that first moment in Lascaux. The teenage boys crawling into the unknown, their lamps revealing ancient visions, and us decades later still haunted by what they found. That moment was more than a discovery. It was ARECONNECTION. To the people we used to be, to the dreams we used to have, to a time when darkness wasn't feared, but entered, with torches and pigment, to speak with eternity. Who were the people behind the shadows? Who held the torches, mixed the pigments, and crawled deep into the womb of the earth to paint animals that seemed to breathe? Who pressed their hands to the stone, leaving behind a silhouette, as if to say, I was here, I mattered. They left no names, no written records, no empires or cities. Only echoes. But those echoes whisper enough to trace their steps, to uncover the lives of the tribes who painted the caves, and through them, learn how we became human. These were the hunter-gatherers of the Upper Paleolithic. Nomadic, resilient, and astonishingly sophisticated, they walked a world that no longer exists. A Europe in the grip of the Ice Age. Woolly mammoths roamed the tundra. Saber-toothed cats stalked the shadows. Giant deer with antlers, the size of small trees, grazed under icy skies. Yet somehow, in that harsh, unforgiving world, these early humans carved out not just survival, but culture. Let's start with what we know. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, first arrived in Europe around 45,000 years ago. Migrating from Africa and the Middle East, they encountered a continent already occupied by another human species, the Neanderthals. But within a few thousand years, the Neanderthals disappeared. Why? That's a mystery with many theories. Climate change, competition, interbreeding. But what's important here is that sapiens thrived, adapting rapidly to this new environment. They formed small bands, often 25 to 50 people. They moved with the seasons, following herds of reindeer, mammoth, and bison. They made tools of flint and bone. They wore clothes stitched from animal hides. And in their spare time, what little they had, they created. They carved tiny figurines, etched patterns into tools, composed music with flutes made from bird bones. And, of course, they painted. These weren't people just surviving. They were thinking, dreaming, believing. So what did they believe? Without written records, we can't know for sure. But the caves offer clues, not in words, but in symbols and silence. Many scholars think these early humans practiced forms of animism, the belief that all things, from animals to rocks to rivers, have a spirit. It's a worldview found in many indigenous cultures today. In this framework, Painting a bison on the wall wasn't just a memory or a decoration, it was a spiritual act, a connection to the animal's essence. Maybe a prayer, maybe a pact. Some caves contain images of wounded animals, spears drawn into their sides. Could these be part of hunting magic, rituals performed to ensure success on the next expedition? Others show strange hybrid figures, half human, half human. One in the Chauvet cave depicts a bison-headed man. Another in Lascaux shows a figure with antlers and paws. Were these early shamans? Story characters? Spirits? We may never know exactly, but one thing is clear. These tribes had mythology. They told stories. They believed in realms beyond the physical, and those beliefs were painted on cave walls for future generations, maybe even for us. Let's take a closer look at one individual from this forgotten world. In 2018, scientists discovered footprints deep in the Lascaux cave in France left by a child, perhaps around 10 years old. The prints showed the child walking barefoot, sometimes shuffling, sometimes dancing. There were also smaller prints, possibly a dog or early domesticated wolf. That scene is so vivid, it hurts. A child, thousands of years ago, exploring a pitch-dark cave, holding a torch, trailing their fingers through soft clay, leaving behind not just art but themselves. And they weren't alone. Across many caves, we find evidence of family groups entering together. In some places, handprints suggest multiple generations left. Their marks side by side, elders and children. That tells us something crucial. These weren't private rituals. They were communal experiences. Shared moments of wonder and meaning, passed down like ancient lullabies. But let's not romanticize them. Too much. Life was brutal, dangerous, cold. The average life expectancy might have been just 30 to 35 years. Infant mortality was high. Injuries were often fatal. There were no antibiotics, no doctors, no certainty. Yet even in the midst of all this, they made time for art. Why? Maybe because when your world is fragile, the urge to leave a mark becomes stronger. Maybe because creativity is not a luxury, it's a survival skill, a way to teach, to remember, to find meaning in chaos. Now let's talk about something striking. There were no borders. These tribes moved freely across what we now call Europe. Archaeologists have found the same styles of tools, ornaments, and symbols scattered from Spain to Siberia, and cave art shows similar themes: denumals, handprints, geometric shapes even, when separated by thousands of miles. This raises a fascinating question. Did these tribes share a common symbolic system? Anthropologist Genevieve von Petzinger thinks so. She spent years cataloging the 32 recurring symbols in European cave art, things like lines, spirals, dots, and branching trees. These marks show up in different caves over millennia. It's as if early humans were building a visual language, a proto-alphabet, something more than just decoration. A code, a memory system, maybe even the seeds of written communication. We don't often think of cave painters as the ancestors of scribes and poets, but maybe we should. Let's pause on one of the most haunting details of all. The handprints. In dozens of caves, we find hand stencils created by blowing pigment around a hand pressed to the wall. The result is ghostly, almost defiant, a negative space, the outline of a hand that once touched stone and never returned. What's remarkable is how personal they feel. Some are large, others tiny, likely children. Some are missing fingers, possibly due to frostbite or ritual amputation. Some are placed high on the wall, meaning someone had to lift a child up to leave their mark. Think about that. A parent holding a child reaching out, a burst of pigment, and then silence. For 20,000 years, it's hard to imagine anything more human. Let's shift focus briefly to the tools of the trade. How did they do it? First, pigments. These early artists used materials like ochre, manganese, and charcoal ground into powder and mixed with water, animal fat, or even urine to create paint. They used brushes made from hair, moss, or chewed sticks. Sometimes they applied color with fingers, or by blowing it through hollow bones. They scraped the walls to create contrast, carved outlines with flint tools, and shaped clay to give dimension. And they used light with intent. Key figures, fire to animate shadows, flickering flames to create the illusion of movement. These weren't amateurs, they were technicians, storytellers, and ritual leaders. But not all tribes were the same. Different regions developed different styles. In Spain, the Altamira cave features stunning bison painted in rich reds and blacks. with muscular forms that seem to leap off the ceiling. In France, Chauvet's lions and bears feel wild and almost cinematic, drawn with such elegance they could be concept art for a modern film. In Italy, Romania, Germany, even as far as Indonesia and Australia, we find similar art traditions. That's not just impressive, it's revolutionary, because it means the impulse to create, to mark, to remember was universal. It didn't belong to one tribe, one region, one advanced group. It belonged to all of us. Now, you might be wondering, could some of these cave artists have been women? Absolutely. For decades, archaeology was dominated by male voices who assumed men did the painting because men were the hunters and the animals were game. But new research suggests otherwise. Hand stencils have been analyzed for fingeration, indicator of biological sex, and many appear to be female. That means women weren't just participating. They may have been the primary artists. It changes the whole picture. Imagine a group of women and children entering a sacred cave together, telling stories, creating symbols, passing on memory not as observers, but as leaders of culture. So what do we call these people? We don't know their tribal names. We don't know what they called themselves. But archaeologists group them under cultures like Aurignacian, 43,000 to 26,000 years ago. The earliest cave artists in Europe, Gravetian 33,000 to 21,000 years, Ago, famous for Venus figurines and rich symbolic life, Magdalenian, 17,000 to 12,000 years ago. The culture behind Lascaux and Altamira. These aren't just labels, they're chapters in a vast, invisible history. Each culture brought innovations, new tools, new forms of art, new ways of thinking. And then, like smoke in the wind, they vanish, leaving only the walls to remember them. So let's return to the big question. Why did they paint? To honor the hunt, to teach the young, to call on spirits, to tell stories, to say we were here. Maybe all of the above. But here's something to consider. They didn't have to. They could have just hunted, eaten, slept, moved on. Instead, they crawled into darkness, lit flames, mixed color, and reached out with their hands not to take, but to give. And in that gesture, bold, human, eternal, they created the first whispers of art, culture, and language. They didn't leave us ruins, they left us voices, silent ones, but not forgotten. Long before alphabets, before ink met parchment, before the first voice etched its story into song or prayer, there was silence, or so we often imagine. But was it really silent? What if those cave walls, those flickering images of bison and handprints and mysterious geometric marks, were speaking, not in the way we speak today, with verbs and syntax, but in another, older language, a visual language, a symbolic code, one that didn't need sound to carry meaning, one that transcended tribes, borders, even time. The question is no longer whether early humans could speak. The question is, what came first, language or symbols? And if symbols came first, were the caves humanity's first conversations? Let's begin with something fundamental. Language is not just speech, it's communication. A system for transmitting ideas, feelings, commands, dreams, and humans are wired for it. We gesture, we draw, we sign, we sing. Our brains are built to connect. Modern spoken language is estimated to have developed anywhere from 50,000 to 150,000 years ago, long before the earliest cave paintings. But language leaves no fossils. You can't dig up a sentence. So how do we track its origin? We follow the breadcrumbs, indirect clues hidden in tools, bones, and especially art. The Upper Paleolithic explosion of creativity starting around 40,000 years ago marks a turning point in human evolution. It wasn't just about better tools or clever hunting techniques. It was about symbolic thinking. And symbolic thinking is the backbone of language. Imagine this. You paint a horse on a wall. That image is not a real horse. It's a represent symbol. And symbols are the beginning of abstraction. When a line means a horse, or a mark means danger, or a color means spirit, you're no longer just reacting to the world, you're interpreting it, explaining it. That's language. In embryo, some of the earliest symbolic behaviors predate cave art. We've found engraved ochre pieces from Lascaux Cave in South Africa, dating back 75,000 years, with crosshatch patterns carved by human hands. These weren't random scratches. They had form, repetition, rhythm. Even earlier, in Trinel, Java, a shell etched with a zigzag pattern is believed to have been carved by Homo erectus nearly 500,000 years ago. So maybe the question isn't when language began, but when humans began to externalize it, to store it, share it, paint it. Because once meaning left the mind and landed on a wall, it could reach others even across millennia. Let's look again at those strange geometric signs found in caves across Europe. Dots, spirals, lines, grids, branch-like shapes. They might seem simple, but they appear in patterns, combinations, repetitions, variations. Genevieve von Petzinger's research catalogued 32 recurring signs, found in over 200 caves, spanning more than 20,000 years. Some signs cluster near animals. Others appear near cave entrances. Some are carved, others painted. But they repeat. That repetition is important. Because language is pattern. A single mark is a doodle. A pattern of marks is structure. Structure becomes code, and code becomes communication. These weren't just decorations. They were messages. The tricky part, we don't know what they said. Let's get speculative, but grounded. Could the symbols have been clan markers, like early coats of arms, identifying which group painted the cave? Calendrical or seasonal indicators, telling others when to hunt, when to migrate. Mythological references, reminders of stories passed down orally. Spiritual signs, meant to ward off danger or summon protection. Some researchers believe combinations of dots and lines may have functioned, like early sentence structures, basic phrases of meaning. If that's true, these weren't just precursors to language. They were language in visual form, not letters, not phonemes, but meaning, passed silently. Here's where things get fascinating. Across the world, in caves far from Europe, Indonesia, Australia, the Americas, we find similar geometric shapes. Spirals, ladders, zigzags. Does this coincidence, or does it point to a shared neurological root? Enter the idea of entoptic phenomena, visual patterns generated by the human brain under altered states of consciousness, like trance, fever, or sensory deprivation. These patterns, grids, spirals, radiating lines, often appear in cave art. It suggests that early humans, experiencing ritual or trance states deep in caves, might have seen these shapes in their mind's end, then painted them on the walls. In this theory, the cave becomes not just a canvas, but a mind space, a place where internal visions are externalized, forming the earliest languages of the imagination. Now, let's address a crucial turning point. Sound. Language is often spoken, yes, but it also resonates. And caves, especially deep limestone ones, are perfect echo chambers. Some researchers have mapped the acoustic properties of painted caves. Guess what they found? The most resonant spots, places where sound echoes, vibrates, lingers, often coincide with the most elaborate paintings. Coincidence? Unlikely. It seems that early humans weren't just painting in silence. They were singing, chanting, drumming, and the art responded. The walls, the echoes, the flickering torchlighted, all became one immersive language. An experience. This suggests something profound. That language, especially sacred or ritual language, was multisensory. Not just spoken or drawn, but felt. Return to the idea of gesture. Before words, before writing, humans used gesture as a primary mode of communication. And that's still true today. We nod, we shrug, we wave, we point. Much of human communication is nonverbal. Early humans may have used entire systems of gesture to communicate while hunting or migrating. Some indigenous cultures still preserve rich sign languages that function independently of speech. What if those painted animals shown in dynamic poses, running, turning, leaping, were also gestural narratives, frozen moments from stories once acted out with hands, bodies, and movement? The cave, again, becomes a stage, and the symbols a script. Now here's where things truly come together. Memory. Language is a tool for remembering, and when memory becomes external, carved, painted, passed on, it becomes culture. The Aboriginal Australians speak of songlines, pathways across the land encoded in song, story, and ritual. Walking these paths, singing the right songs, connects the traveler to the landscape, to ancestors, to time itself. What if the caves functioned similarly? Not just places of art, but memory palaces. Walk into the cave, turn left at the bear, chant the song near the deer, remember the flood, remember the hunt, remember the name of the grandmother who painted the dots. This is language at its most profound, not just sound or sign, but architecture of memory. One more mystery. Why didn't this symbolic system evolve directly into writing? If humans were already using signs, Why wait thousands of years for alphabets? It may be because the purpose of those early symbols was different. Writing, as we know it, developed to record trade, law, and ownership practical needs of early civilization. But cave symbols weren't practical. They were emotional, spiritual, cultural. They weren't receipts. They were reverence. That's why they feel more like poetry than spreadsheets, closer to music than math. And maybe that's why they resonate so deeply even now. Now let's imagine a moment. You're a young person in a Paleolithic tribe. It's your first time going into the sacred cave. You hold a torch, the flame sputtering. You step into the dark, your elders guiding you, singing softly. You see the handprints of your ancestors. You see the stag, the lion, the spiral. You reach into the pouch at your side, mix red ochre with water, and blow around your hand. Your mark joins. There's no words spoken, but everything understood. That is language, not as grammar or text, but as connection. Let's not forget, language isn't static. It evolves. From gesture to speech, from speech to symbol, from symbol to writing, from writing to code, from code back to symbols. Think about how modern humans use emojis, memes, GIFs, visual languages evolving in real time, often replacing full sentences with a single icon. Maybe we're not so far from the caves after all. Maybe language has always been a feeling, too symbol, too story, too silence. Let's return to the symbols one last time. We don't know what the ladder shapes meant, or the dots, or the spirals, but we feel them. They carry the weight of meaning, even if we don't have the key. Like a dream you can't quite remember, or a word on the tip of your tongue. That's the paradox of early language. Silent, yet powerful. Absent, yet everywhere, but forgotten, yet immortal. And perhaps, in a strange way, these symbols don't need translation, because they speak in the oldest tongue of all, human imagination. You don't need a Rosetta Stone to understand awe, or fear, or wonder. All you need is to stand before that painted wall and listen, not with your ears, but with something deeper, because in that stillness, the language before words is still speaking. And you're part of the conversation now. A spiral scratched into stone in southern France. A zigzag etched on a rock face in Indonesia. A cluster of dots painted deep inside an ancient cave in Argentina. Different continents, different people, different times, and yet the same shapes. Why? How is it possible that humans, separated by oceans, mountains, and tens of thousands of years, created the same symbols? Coincidence? Convergent thinking? Shared ancestry? Or something far more profound? In this chapter, we travel across the globe, following the trail of symbols that bind humanity together. A silent, visual language that seems to echo from every corner of the earth. We'll explore how these simple marks, dots, spirals, grids, handprints, might just be the earliest signs of a universal human code, one etched not into stone tablets, but into our very minds. Let's begin with the dots. One of the most common symbols found in prehistoric cave art is the dot, singular, or arranged in clusters, rows, or even constellations. In Lascaux, dots appear near painted animals. In South Africa's Blombos, cave dating back 75,000 years, we see similar groupings carved into pieces of ochre. In caves across Australia, the Aboriginal peoples have long used dot painting in both sacred and secular art, layering meaning through repetition and rhythm. Across Indonesia, in the caves of Sulawesi dating back over 40,000 years, dots appear alongside hand stencils and animals. And in the Americas, petroglyphs carved into desert rock in Utah, Argentina, and Brazil show you, guessed it, dash dots, not just dots, patterns. So why dots? On the surface, they're the simplest mark a human hand can make, but that's what makes them powerful. Dots can count, represent, mark territory, or indicate presence. In modern alphabets, they serve as punctuation. In mathematics, as indicators of place. In music, as notations of rhythm. Dots can also mean nothing or everything, and the fact that they appear so universally suggests they weren't random. They were intentional. Think about it. If you were an early human trying to pass on knowledge, how many bison to hunt, which caves to avoid, how many moons until migration, what would you use? You'd use marks. Simple, repeatable, durable. The first data, the first records. But let's zoom out. Dots are just the beginning. Across dozens of caves in Europe, researchers have catalogued symbols like zigzags and closed triangles, finger flutings, finger-drawn lines in soft cave walls, Branch-like figures, these are not depictions of animals or people. They are abstract. They seem to represent ideas. And that's critical, because abstraction is at the heart of human cognition. To create an abstract symbol is to step away from what something looks like, and instead capture what it means. When a spiral represents a path, or time, or rebirth, that's not art. That's conceptual language. Now let's cross the globe. In Australia, the Aboriginal peoples have practiced visual storytelling for tens of thousands of years. Their art includes spirals, dots, crochets, and lines often layered in complex arrangements that encode stories, laws, and spiritual paths. In Papua New Guinea, similar symbols appear in bark paintings and ceremonial carvings. In southern Africa, the San people, one of the world's oldest continuous cultures, used geometric marks alongside their vibrant animal art. Their symbols often referenced trance experiences and dream states. In the American Southwest, ancestral Puebloan petroglyphs show spirals, concentric circles, zigzags, and grids carved into rock. Some are positioned to align with solstices and lunar cycles, turning symbols into celestial calendars. And in Siberia, the Chukchi and Awenki peoples have long used simple geometric patterns carved into bones and tools to communicate ideas about animals, spirits, and travel. Here's the twist. Most of these cultures had no contact with one another. Separated by oceans, separated by time. Yet their visual vocabularies overlap. How? There are a few possible explanations. 1. Shared origins. All modern humans trace their ancestry to Africa. It's possible that these symbolic traditions began before the great human migrations, carried in the minds of travelers who spread across the globe. The symbolic seed was planted early and grew in parallel lines across continents. 2. Convergent invention. Human brains, though diverse, are shaped by the same biology. Just as wings evolved in birds and bats independently, similar symbols may have emerged wherever humans tried to represent abstract ideas. Spirals, dots, lines, these are natural extensions of how the mind sees and organizes information. 3. Neurological universals. When the brain enters altered states through sensory deprivation, deep meditation, or psychedelic rituals, it often produces the same visual patterns in toptic forms. These include grids, spirals, and waves. If early cave painters saw these shapes during trance states, it would explain their recurrence in ritual art across the world. Whatever the cause, the result is undeniable. There is a symbolic thread connecting USA visual language, older than Babylon, older than the pyramids, a language of silence and memory. Let's take one symbol in particular. The spiral, found in caves in France, on rocks in Ireland, in temples in Peru, in petroglyphs in Arizona, in Bori tattoos, in Hindu art, in Celtic stonework. The spiral often represents time, cycles, birth, or the sun. It moves outward growth, or inward return. And here's the astonishing thing. No one taught the Maori and the Celts the spiral. They arrived at it independently, because it's natural. It mirrors the whirlpool, the galaxy, the seashell, even the human fingerprint. It's a symbol written into the fabric of the universe and recognized by every culture that's tried to make sense of that universe. But this isn't just about pretty shapes. Symbols carry power. They mark territory, establish identity, encode ritual, preserve memory. In oral cultures, where nothing is written, symbols act as mnemonic devices, visual triggers that help storytellers remember complex narratives. A line becomes a journey. A zigzag becomes a river. A circle becomes a family. It's no accident that indigenous cultures worldwide use sand drawings, body paint, and patterned carvings as part of storytelling, ceremony, and law. Symbols weren't just for decoration. They were tools of communication, control, and continuity. They held societies together. Now, here's something that might surprise you. The earliest known writing system, Sumerian cuneiform, Egyptian hieroglyphs, Chinese oracle bone script, did not begin with letters. They began with symbols, icons representing objects, actions, concepts. Over time, these icons evolved into more abstract signs, eventually becoming the alphabets and characters we use today. So when you look at a dot or spiral from 40,000 years ago, you're not looking at something primitive. You're looking at the beginning of writing, of language, of recorded thought, a straight line from the cave wall to the touchscreen. Let's pause for a thought experiment. If aliens visited Earth and wanted to understand humanity not through words, but through the marks we've left behind, what would they'd find the same shapes in caves, temples, pyramids, cathedrals, tattoos, circuit boards, city grids. They'd find spirals and squares and crosses and dots. They'd find symbols, not tied to language, not bound by culture, but universal. In that way, the symbols that connect the world are not just ancient. They are timeless. Still, we must ask, did these symbols mean the same things to everyone? Probably not. Meaning is contextual. A spiral in a fertility ritual might mean womb. In a sun cult, it might mean solar power. In a navigation system, it might mean pathway. But the power of a symbol isn't always in its fixed meaning. Sometimes it's in its mystery, its invitation to interpretation. That's why symbols still thrive in religion, art, and psychology. Think of the cross, the yin-yang, the mandala, the tree of life. They're not codes to crack. They're mirrors to peer into. And the same may have been true in the caves. Let's return to the caves for one final image. You're deep underground. The torchlight flickers. Shadows jump across a wall, etched with marks. You see a ladder-like symbol. Dots arranged like a constellation. A spiral painted above the head of a bison. You don't speak the language of the tribe that made these. You never will. And yet you feel something. Recognition, curiosity, a sense of story. That's the power of universal symbols. They bypass language, going straight to the imagination. They don't tell you what to think. They remind you how to feel. So what does all this mean for us? It means we're not as disconnected as we think. It means the people in those caves, nameless, barefoot, long gone, weren't just surviving. They were speaking. Across valleys, across oceans, across centuries. And we're still listening. Every time we draw a heart. Every time we look at a traffic sign. Every time we open an app and click on an icon, we're using the same logic. The same shorthand. The same impulse to compress meaning into form. The symbols that connect the world are not just ancient relics. They are alive in our minds. Our tools, our art. And somewhere, deep in the caves where it all began, the echoes still whisper, I was here, I mattered, I had something to say. Still, one thing is clear. Pattern matters. When a particular symbol keeps appearing next to a specific animal, or in a certain cave zone, or only during a particular time period, that's not coincidence. That's communication. But how do we decode it? The limits of interpretation. Here's the dilemma. We don't have a Rosetta Stone for Paleolithic symbols. There's no ancient translator, no surviving oral tradition passed down from the people who painted those walls. All we have are shapes, lines, dots, angles, and time, tens of thousands of years of silence. Still, we can make educated guesses. For example, in many cases, researchers have found that certain symbols consistently appear next to specific animals. Let's say we find a double chevron next to a mammoth in multiple caves across France and Spain. Could it indicate something about the mammoth, its movement, its behavior, maybe even its role in a seasonal hunt? Or perhaps it's more abstract, a clan symbol, indicating ownership of the hunt or the cave itself. We don't know. But the repetition points toward intention, and that's the first step toward language. Beyond art, a communication system, there's a major difference between art and writing. Art is expressive, emotional, open to interpretation. Writing, on the other hand, has structure. It encodes meaning. It can be read, passed on, and understood by someone who didn't create it. Now, Paleolithic cave symbols aren't right in the traditional sense. There's no grammar, no syntax, no alphabet. But that's the fascinating part. What if we're looking at a proto-writing system? Think of it like this. Imagine humans learning to communicate complex ideas through consistent shapes. Maybe each symbol didn't represent a sound, like in modern writing, but an idea, a season, a place, a ritual. This would make the cave signs more like a pictographic code, something halfway between pure art and full-blown writing. It's not writing as we define it, but it's certainly not just random scratches. The calendar theory, one of the boldest and most compelling theories, comes from a man named Ben Bacon, a British furniture conservator turned amateur archaeologist. Yes, you read that right. In 2023, Bacon and a team of academics published a paper arguing that some cave symbols were used as calendrical records, a way for Ice Age people to track seasonal behaviors of animals. They focused on dot patterns and line clusters found next to images of deer, horses, bison, and other prey. That their hypothesis. These marks might represent lunar months, essentially a prehistoric lunar calendar. that helped hunters predict migration, mating seasons, and even food availability. Imagine that. People 20,000 years ago might have been using a lunar counting system etched into cave walls, not just for art, but for survival. If true, it would be the oldest known use of a calendar in human history, and that changes everything. Echoes of a global language. Here's where things get strange. These 32 recurring symbols, they don't just show up in Europe, in Indonesia, India, Australia, even South Africa. Prehistoric rock art features many of the same shapes, dots, lines, spirals, ladders, and yet these regions had no contact with one another, no shared culture, no common language. So how is it possible? Some scientists suggest these symbols come from a shared cognitive toolkit, the idea that the human brain, once it evolved the capacity for symbolic thinking, naturally created the same kinds of patterns. Regardless of geography, it's like music. Across all cultures, humans independently invented rhythms and melodies. Why? Because our brains are wired to recognize them. Could the same be true for visual symbols? That would mean the birth of symbolic communication wasn't isolated or cultural, it was biological. It was part of becoming human. From symbol to story, let's zoom out for a moment. Imagine, you're a child growing up in a Paleolithic tribe. You've heard stories told by firelight of the hunt, the spirits, the ancestors. One day, your elders lead you into the deep cave. They point to a wall. There, glowing by torchlight, are shapes your people have used for generations. You know them. Everyone does. A handprint means presence. A zigzag means danger, maybe a snake, or a cursed place. A spiral, the journey of the soul. To us, they look like scratches. To them, it was shared knowledge. Not quite writing, but a language of memory. Echoes. In modern alphabets, it might sound like a stretch, but some linguists have speculated that modern letters, like those in our alphabets, may have evolved from shapes like these. Take the letter M. It originally came from the Egyptian symbol for water, which was drawn as wavy lines, a symbol that appears in many cave systems, or which came from a pictogram of an ox head which, when flipped upside down, looks like our modern capital A now. This doesn't mean the Lascaux painters invented the alphabet, but it raises a fascinating question. Were the seeds of writing already being planted in the cave stems of thousands of years before the first true script, myth, memory, and meaning? The further back we go, the blurrier the line becomes between history and myth. But perhaps, for Paleolithic people, there was no difference. When they etched a shape into stone, it wasn't just for communication. It was sacred. A spiral wasn't just a shape. It was the soul's path into the underworld. A handprint wasn't just "I was here." It was a ritual marking your presence for the spirits, for your tribe, for eternity. In that way, cave symbols are more than language. They are echoes of belief. Fragments of a world where thought, spirit, and stone were inseparable. So was it the first writing? Here's the honest answer. We don't know. What we do know is this. Early humans created a consistent set of symbols. Those symbols appear globally. They were used intentionally, repeated, patterned, placed with care. Some may have recorded in stories, rituals. They predate the earliest known writing systems by over 20,000 years. So perhaps the question isn't, was it writing? Maybe the better question is, was it the beginning? The beginning of humans trying to reach beyond the moment, to leave something that would outlast them, to speak without sound across centuries of silence. Final thoughts. In the end, what these symbols meant may never be fully known, but maybe that's the point. They weren't meant just for us. They were for the world. They came from a world of hunters, shamans, and storytellers. A world where every line scratched into stone carried a piece of the human soul. And as long as we keep looking, keep wondering, and keep listening to the whispers in stone, we honor the first humans who dared to write without words. There's something poetic about the fact that the oldest art we've ever discovered lies hidden in the darkest corners of the earth. Not in temples, not in ancient cities, but deep underground, buried behind thousands of years of silence and stone. These were not random doodles. They were intentional, meaningful, often dangerous undertakings. And today, a new generation of scientists, armed with cutting-edge tools, are peeling back layers of time to reveal astonishing insights about early humans, from how they lived to how they thought. Let's descend into the science and the secrets of prehistoric caves. Why go so deep? It starts with a question that archaeologists have puzzled over for decades. Why did early humans go so deep into these caves to make art? The answer isn't simple. First, consider the conditions. These weren't wide open spaces with natural light. They were narrow, winding passages. You'd have to crawl, squeeze, climb. Sometimes, you'd travel hundreds of meters in pitch blackness, torches flickering, air thin, temperature dropping. And they didn't just do this once. In many caves, there are layers upon layers of art, spanning hundreds or even thousands of years. So again, why go through all this trouble? Some theories point to ritual significance. Going deep into the earth may have represented a kind of symbolic journey into the womb of nature or the spirit world. The further you went, the more sacred the space became. Others believe it was about preservation. Art placed deep in a cave was shielded from rain, wind, sunlight, and could survive for millennia. But recent science has added another dimension. Acoustic marvels in many decorated caves. Scientists have found something remarkable. The art often coincides with areas of unique acoustics. Echo chambers, resonant caverns, spots where sound travels or amplifies in a distinct way. Researchers began testing this with simple experiments, clapping, singing, drumming, and sure enough, in cave after cave, they found that many of the most elaborate paintings were placed precisely where the echoes were strongest. Coincidence? Unlikely. This suggests that early humans used sound as part of the experience. Perhaps chanting, singing, or drumming as part of a ritual. Some even believe cave walls spoke when struck, making the animals painted on them seem alive, breathing with sound. So in a way, these weren't just art galleries. They were immersive, multimedia experiences combining sight, sound, and sensation in a setting that felt otherworldly. A prehistoric version of VR. Thousands of years before electricity, the tools of time. You might imagine that scientists just wander into a cave, look at the walls, and jot things down. But the reality of studying cave art today is far more complex and far more advanced. Let's walk through the modern toolkit of a prehistoric cave scientist. 1. Radiocarbon dating. This one's the classic. If there's charcoal in the paint, and often there is, scientists can date it by measuring how much carbon-14 remains. That's how we know some cave paintings in Europe are over 30,000 years old. But what if there's no charcoal? That's where things get interesting. 2. Uranium-thorium dating. This method doesn't date the painting itself. It dates the calcite that forms over the painting, like a skin of mineral dust. Think of it as dating the sealing of the paint layer. If the calcite is 20,000 years old, then the painting beneath it is at least that old. This is how scientists confirmed that some Spanish cave art dates back more than 64,000 years long, before Homo sapiens arrived in Europe, which leads to a bombshell possibility. Did Neanderthals paint? Let's stop here, because if some of these paintings really do date back over 60,000 years, they weren't made by modern humans. They were made by Neanderthals. Yes, the same brutes we once thought were little more than dumb cavemen. That changes everything. In 2018, uranium-thorium dating of several Spanish caves revealed red lines, symbols, and hand stencils that predated Homo sapiens' arrival by at least 20,000 years. That means Neanderthals weren't just tool users, they were symbolic thinkers. They may have had art, ritual, even language. It's one of the most profound revelations in modern archaeology, and one we're still coming to grips with. Maybe we weren't the only species who stared into the darkness and saw meaning. The microscopic clues now zoom in. Beyond the paintings themselves, scientists have begun analyzing the cave surfaces, the pigment particles, even the residual oils from torches left on the ceilings. Some researchers now use 3D laser scanning to map every crack, every brushstroke down to the sub-millimeter level. They could see the angles at which tools were used, the strokes of fingers, even the prints of ancient palms pressed into damp cave walls. Others used microscopic residue analysis to identify plant resins, animal fats, and mineral components used in the paints. You might think prehistoric people used just charcoal and spit, but no, they mixed pigments with fat, blood, urine, and spit to make durable paints. They crushed hematite and manganese dioxide for reds and blacks, and sometimes even applied them with blowpipes, tubes of bone used to spray paint like an ancient airbrush. And those iconic hand stencils, they were made by placing a hand on the wall and spraying paint around it, leaving a ghostly outline. In some cases, they're so small they likely belonged to children. Footprints, fire, and smoke. Cave art isn't the only thing scientists are studying. In places like Chauvet Cave, France, researchers have found footprints preserved in clay floors. Not fossilized, just dried. and never disturbed for tens of thousands of years. There's one trail that tells a haunting story. The footprints of a child, walking alongside a wolf. Was it a pet? A companion? A mythological figure? We'll never know, but the image lingers. Elsewhere, scientists analyze torch marks on ceilings and smoke residue on walls. From this, they've learned how people lit the caves, how long they stayed, and even how the airflow affected oxygen levels. It's like reading a diary written in flame. DNA in the dirt. In the last decade, a revolution has occurred. Scientists have begun to extract ancient DNA, not from bones or artifacts, but from sediment. Yes, from the dirt in caves. This technique, called environmental DNA, eDNA, allows researchers to detect traces of human and animal presence, even when no physical remains are found. It's already yielded astonishing results. In caves with no visible remains, scientists have confirmed the past presence of Neanderthals, Homo sapiens, and even now extinct animals, like cave lions and woolly rhinos. Imagine being able to build a snapshot of who stood in a cave, simply from a handful of soil. AI meets the Stone Age now. Let's fast forward to the newest frontier. Researchers are using AI and machine learning to identify patterns in cave art that the human eye might miss. One project trained a neural network to analyze thousands of prehistoric symbols and found groupings and clusters that suggest grammatical rules or structured use. Think about that. A computer is helping us find the syntax of cave symbols, potentially unlocking the first glimmers of prehistoric grammar. Other projects use AI to reconstruct faded art or simulate how cave walls would have looked by torchlight, giving us a glimpse of the art as its creators saw it. It's like time travel, one pixel at a time. What are we really searching for? At the end of the day, why do we care so much about cave art? Maybe because it reminds us that the past isn't just dates and bones. It's voices. Voices trying to reach us through stone and silence. And the more science uncovers, the more human those voices become. We see the brushstrokes of a mother teaching her child, the handprint of a boy standing beside a fire, the scratched line of a shaman marking the end of winter. The cave becomes not just a gallery, but a portal. A place where the science of today meets the spirit of the past. And as our tools grow sharper and our questions deeper, we may one day hear those voices more clearly than ever before. Before the first alphabet, before ink met parchment, before any society carved their laws into stone or whispered them around fires, there was another kind of language, one without sentences, one without words. And yet it connected people, it traveled through generations. It sparked emotion. It recorded memory. This was symbolic language, a visual and emotional system of meaning. That may be the earliest root of everything we now call culture, communication, and consciousness. In this chapter, we'll uncover what this language looked like, where it's been found, and what it might tell us about the first stories humans ever told. The first marks a story begins not with full paintings, but with something far more primal. Abstract symbols, simple shapes, dots, lines, cross-hatching grids, branching forms. These might not seem impressive at first glance, but they are the first signs of intentional expression made by humans and their relatives. In the Lascaux Cave in South Africa, archaeologists found something revolutionary, a piece of ochre, etched with a deliberate crosshatch pattern, more than 75,000 years old. Not an accident, not a scratch, a symbol repeated, deliberate, maybe even encoded. This discovery predates the famous cave art of Europe by tens of thousands of years, and it forces us to rethink the story of symbolic thinking. It didn't start in Europe. It started long before, in the minds of humans who had no written script, no permanent settlements, and yet the urge to leave a mark. The 32 symbols that changed everything. Let's jump forward to the work of Genevieve von Petzinger, a Canadian paleoanthropologist who has spent years cataloging the symbols found in European cave art. After studying more than 350 sites, she identified 32 recurring geometric signs used by early humans across France, Spain, Italy, and beyond. These include dots, lines, triangles, hand, stencils, branching, Y-shapes, crossed as spirals, ladder, patterns. Here's what's remarkable. These signs appear consistently across vast distances and long periods of time, from 40,000 to 10,000 years ago. Think about that. Across 30,000 years, different humans, separated by thousands of kilometers, were using the same set of symbols. It suggests a shared symbolic vocabulary, a kind of proto-writing, not a language, per se, not with grammar or syntax, but a visual code. one that could carry meaning from generation to generation, even in the absence of spoken words. And the implications are enormous. What did these symbols mean? Of course, the burning question is, what did these signs mean? We don't know for sure, but we do have some ideas. Some believe they were calendrical tracking moon cycles, seasons, or migrations. Others see them as territorial markers, to denote clan presence or land boundaries. Still others think they could be spiritual, representing the unseen world, dreams, spirits, or cosmology. The latter, or comb symbols, for instance, may have represented social hierarchies. The spirals could reflect trance states or altered consciousness, and the branching E's could they represent trees. Choices, rivers, will likely never know the full truth. But that's the beauty of these symbols. They invite us to think, to imagine, to reach across time and ask, what were you trying to say? The hand that speaks one symbol stands out more than any other in caves around the world. The hand stencil. You've seen them, a ghostly outline of a human hand, sprayed with pigment so that the negative space remains. It's not just art, it's a signature. It says, I was here, from Indonesia to Argentina, Spain to Australia. These stencils appear in caves from 40,000 years ago to just a few centuries ago. Men, women, children, all left their mark. Some are clustered in groups, some are alone, some are layered over each other, creating a tapestry of overlapping presences. And here's something fascinating. Modern studies show that many of these hands belong to females. For decades, archaeologists assumed that men made most of the art, due to the hunting scenes and animal depictions. But recent biometric analysis, based on finger lengths and palm ratios, revealed that up to 75% of the hand stencils were female. It was a shared experience, a human one. Young or old, man or woman, all felt the need to speak without words. The cave is a story now. Consider this. What if the cave itself was the book, and the art inside the narrative? Modern researchers have started to look at caves not as random collections of drawings, but as structured spaces of meaning. They've found that certain images appear near entrances, like warning signs or welcome symbols. Deeper in, you'll find more complex scenes, perhaps stories, or rituals, or lessons. It's like walking through a scroll with the depth of the cave, reflecting the depth of the story. In Chauvet Cave, France, the order of images may suggest a mythological journey, animals battling, transforming, dancing, a world of meaning, unfolding as you move deeper. Some believe caves were schools, places where knowledge was passed through image. Others see them as temples, where sacred stories were painted to preserve spiritual memory. Either way, the message is clear. These were not random drawings. They were expressions of thought, proto-writing, or early language. So let's ask the big question. Were these symbols a kind of language? If by language we mean a system of communication that's symbolic, consistent, and shared across people, then yes, it qualifies. But was it writing? Not quite. Writing, as we understand it, has syntax rules about how symbols are arranged to convey specific, repeatable meanings. The cave symbols don't show enough evidence of structured grammar, yet they were more than just art. They were proto-writing, the bridge between pure image and structured language. A visual vocabulary that preceded alphabets by tens of thousands of years. And in some ways, they may have been more powerful, because unlike writing, which must be decoded by the literate, these symbols were felt. You don't need to read ancient French to understand a handprint, or a hunter chasing a bison. The story is told through movement, shape, tension. It's language at its most universal. The birth of narrative. Let's go even deeper. At what point did early humans start telling stories? Not just leaving symbols, but constructing sequences of meaning. Some of the earliest narrative scenes appear around 35,000 years ago. In caves like Lascaux and Altamira, you find entire panoramas, hunters, animals, movement. In Indonesia's Sulawesi Island, a 44,000-year-old painting shows a hunting scene with humanoid figures wearing animal masks, possibly shamans or mythological beings. This may be the earliest known narrative art in human history. Think about that. A scene, a plot, characters. That's the beginning of myth. Of history, of religion, of imagination. It's not just that early humans saw the world. They started to tell it, to shape it, to give it meaning beyond the moment. This, more than fire or tools, or even speech, may be the defining trait of humanity. We tell stories. Did language precede art, or follow it? Now here's a fascinating debate among anthropologists. Did humans first develop spoken language, which later evolved into visual representation? Or did symbolic art marks, gestures, body painting, precede structured speech? There's no clear answer, but some believe that early humans may have painted what they could not yet say. Imagine a world where the mind is full of images, dreams, ideas, but the mouth cannot yet form words. What do? You paint it. You scratch it into stone. You dance it. You sing it. So in a way, cave art may be the first true language, a visual extension of the inner self. Not just communication, but consciousness made visible. The emotional core amidst all the data. The symbols, the theories. We can't forget one thing. These were people. They felt love, fear, joy, loss. Their symbols weren't just functional, they were emotional. Handprint isn't just a mark, it's a presence. A sign of existence in a vast and dangerous world. A spiral isn't just a design, it could reflect a trance, a memory, a vision. In their silence, these caves scream with emotion. They are testaments of the soul, left for us across 40,000 years of time. And that's perhaps the greatest miracle, that we can still feel them. We are the storytellers, so here we are. Modern humans, with smartphones, satellites, and social media still trying to decode the first messages ever left behind. And maybe, in doing so, we're not just learning about the past, we're remembering something deeply human within ourselves. The urge to speak, the need to leave a mark. The power of story. Because long before there were alphabets or poems or novels, there were shapes, on stone, flickering torches, and a hand reaching out, saying, I am here. I matter. This is my story. There are few things more mysterious and more deeply human than ritual. Ritual is the bridge between the known and the unknown, between the physical and the spiritual, between the body and the mind. Long before science, philosophy, or formal religion, early humans used ritual to cope with death, celebrate life, influence nature, and understand the world. But how do we know? What clues did they leave behind? In this chapter, we'll enter the ancient mind, the prehistoric brain that believed in magic, practiced ceremony, and may have seen the world as alive with meaning. This is the world of early human spirituality, death, and the dawn of ritual. One of the most profound indicators of early ritual behavior is also the most heartbreaking: burial. When did we first start burying our dead? Not just discarding bodies, but treating them with reverence. The oldest known intentional burials date back over 100,000 years, possibly even earlier. Neanderthals, once thought to be brutish and emotionless, have now been found in graves lined with ochre, flower pollen, and even tools or bones, suggesting grave goods, items meant to travel with the deceased into another world. Think about what that means. It means these early humans understood death. And more importantly, they couldn't accept it as the end. They needed to believe something continued, some essence, some spirit, some memory. And so they buried the body. With love, with ritual, with meaning. In a world of danger and uncertainty, death became not just an ending, but a gateway. And ritual was how they prepared for the journey. The red ochre mystery. One substance shows up again and again in ancient rituals. Red ochre, this natural iron-rich pigment, found in caves and burials around the world, was used to paint, decorate, and anoint both the living and the dead. Why red? Red is the color of blood, of life, of power. Some scholars believe red ochre symbolized rebirth, a way to recolor the body with the essence of life before sending it into the afterworld. In places like Lascaux Cave, South Africa, and Chauvet Cave, Israel, skeletons dating back 100,000 years have been found stained with red ochre, smeared deliberately on the bones. To the early human mind, ochre may have been more than a mineral. It may have been sacred. Perhaps it was thought to heal, or to protect, or to carry the soul across the threshold. Whatever the reason, its presence in ancient ritual reveals something crucial. These people weren't just surviving, they were believing. The birth of magic. Now, let's talk about something even stranger. Magic. Before science explained the rain, the stars, or the growth of crops, early humans turned to magical thinking. They believed that by performing certain actions, they could influence unseen forces. And surprisingly, they may have been right. Not in a literal sense, but in how these actions affected the mind. Let's look at some of the oldest magical practices in human history. Sympathetic magic. This is the idea that effects like you draw a picture of an animal, spear it with a stick, and believe that doing so helps you kill that animal in real life. Sounds strange? Well, in caves like Lascaux, we find images of bulls and horses with arrows drawn into them, often far from hunting grounds, suggesting these were not scenes of the past, but ritual rehearsals for the future. The belief, if I can control it in image, I can control it in reality. It may seem superstitious, but modern psychology backs this up. Visualization and mental rehearsal do affect physical performance. Athletes and soldiers use it today. Our ancestors did too, with charcoal and torchlight instead of virtual reality. Fetishes, charms, and totems, small carved objects, made of bone, stone, or ivory, have been found in sites dating back 30,000 years or more. Some were shaped like animals, others like pregnant women. Some were abstract. What were they? Possibly charms, used to protect the bearer from harm. Or totems, representing ancestral spirits or tribal identities. Or fetishes, believed to contain magical power. One famous example is the Venus figurines, small statues of women with exaggerated breasts and hips. Were they fertility goddesses, pregnancy charms, symbols of womanhood? Whatever their purpose, they show us something important. Early humans didn't just fear the world, they tried to shape it through objects, symbols, and belief. Caves as sacred spaces. Imagine entering a deep, silent cave. You hold a torch. The walls flicker with light. Your breath echoes. Shadows move. Now imagine this space, not just as shelter, but as sacred. Many archaeologists now believe caves were ritual sites, not living spaces. They were temples, where the physical and the spiritual world overlapped. In France's Chauvet cave, bear skulls were carefully placed on rock altars. In Spain's El Castillo, handprints and dots appeared dozens of meters deep inside the cave, in places that would require crawling through darkness. Why go so deep? Because the deeper you went, the closer you came to the spirit world. The cave became a womb, a portal, a sanctuary. It was here in total darkness that rituals were performed by firelight, to the beat of stone drums or bone flutes. The cave was more than stone. It was alive. Shamanism and the trance now enter the mind of the shaman, the ancient spiritual guide, part healer, part visionary, part storyteller. Across cultures, shamans used drums to enter trance states, hallucinogenic plants to alter perception, chants, and dances to summon spirit symbols, and animals to guide journeys. Though we can't know exactly when shamanism began, its universal appearance in indigenous cultures suggests it has very deep roots, likely stretching back to the Paleolithic. Some cave paintings show half-human, half-animal figures, possibly shamans in transformation. Others depict dots, spirals, grids, and radiating patterns, consistent with neurological hallucinations, suggesting altered states of consciousness during rituals. In these trances, the shaman might speak with ancestors, find lost souls, predict the future, heal the sick, command the hunt to the tribe. The shaman wasn't a performer. They were a bridge between worlds, between life and death, between what is and what might be. Sound in ceremony. We often think of rituals as visual, but sound played an enormous role in deep caves. Early humans discovered that certain chambers echoed, even amplified. Experiments show that many cave paintings are located in acoustic hotspots, places where humming, singing, or drumming creates powerful resonance. This wasn't random. Sound was sacred. It could call spirits, or scare demons, or summon courage before a hunt. Imagine the sound of a bone flute echoing through darkness. A drum made from stretched skin, thudding like a heartbeat. A chant rising and falling, shared by a tribe in total stillness. This was the music of belief. And perhaps, the first concert halls in human history were not buildings, but caves. Fire, and the ritual of light. Now, picture the role of fire. Fire wasn't just warmth or cooking. It was symbolic. In many rituals, fire was the center, the source of transformation. It turned raw meat into food, darkness into vision, cold into warmth, fear into hope. And in ritual, fire became a tool of power. Flames were used to anoint, purify, or banish. Ashes were spread to mark sacred ground. Embers were carried between villages, connecting clans through shared flame. To the early human, fire may have felt like magic itself. Uncontrollable, alive, hungry. It needed to be fed, respected, even worshipped. And in the ritual circle, fire didn't just light the scene, it was part of the ceremony. The ritual calendar. Evidence shows that early humans followed the stars and the cycles of the moon, creating ritual calendars long before writing. In caves and carvings, researchers have found marks that track lunar phases, animal migrations, aligned with seasonal simple solar alignments at sacred sites. These patterns weren't just observations, they were occasions for ritual. The full moon may have called for a hunt, the solstice, a fire ceremony, the equinox, a dance of balance. Over time, these moments evolved into festivals, initiation rites, and harvest ceremonies, rhythms of belief that gave structure to an otherwise chaotic world. The year became a story, and rituals were its chapters. Childbirth and fertility rites. Nothing was more sacred or more mysterious than birth to early humans. Pregnancy was a miracle. A woman's belly grew, and then a new life appeared. To honor this, many societies developed fertility rituals, wearing charms or beads, dedicating food or offerings to female spirits, dancing or singing to promote safe birth. The Venus figurines we mentioned earlier may have been part of these rites, celebrating not just reproduction, but creation itself. And childbirth wasn't just a family matter, it was communal. The tribe needed new life, new strength, new voices to carry the story forward. And so, birth became ritualized, sacred, powerful, and deeply human. From ritual to religion. So, where does this all lead? As human societies grew, so did the complexity of their rituals. Over time, rituals became systems, systems became traditions, and traditions evolved into what we now call religions. But it started here, with a bone buried beside a mother, with a handprint on a cave wall, with a chant in the dark, echoing through stone. Ritual wasn't about control. It was about meaning. It helped people face fear, death, nature, and change. And in doing so, it shaped the mind of early man, teaching him that he was not alone in the universe, that there were forces beyond him, that life was mysterious and magical, and that he had a role to play in it all. Ritual is not just something we do, it's something we are. From our ancestors' fires to today's festivals, weddings, funerals, and prayers, ritual is the thread that weaves together community, memory, and hope. It is proof that even in the harshest times, we reached beyond survival, and reached for something more. Before cities, before kings, before nations, there were tribes, small, nomadic, bound not by borders, but by blood, ritual, and necessity. In this chapter, we dive into the foundations of human community, the moment when isolated family bands began to form larger, more complex units, when we shifted from surviving alone to thriving together. This is the story of early human societies, of clans, cooperation, conflict, and culture. What is a tribe? Let's start with the basics. A tribe is more than a group of people, it's a social system. Imagine 20 to 100 individuals, men, women, children, bound together by kinship ties, shared language, collective rituals, mutual survival. Early tribes were likely extended families. You knew every face, every voice, every smell. You shared stories by firelight. You helped raise each other's children. You hunted together, gathered together. And when someone died, the whole group mourned. These were the first human communities where identity wasn't me, it was us. The need for cooperation. Why did we form tribes in the first place? Simple. Survival demanded it. Picture the Ice Age. Predators stalked the forests. Food was scarce. Weather was brutal. A lone human, no claws, no fangs, no speed, stood little chance. But together, we had strategy. Communication, and the ability to share resources. Hunting became a team sport. One group flushed the prey, another ambushed it. Childcare became communal. While some gathered berries, others watched the babies. Defense became a shared duty, eyes in every direction, weapons in many hands. Tribes didn't just help us survive longer, they helped us think bigger. Kinship and bloodlines. The glue of early tribes was kinship. Every person had a place in the network: father, mother, uncle, cousin, grandparent, and each relationship came with obligations and rights. You didn't just live near each other, you belonged to each other. But not all tribes were strictly biological. Some allowed outsiders to marry in, or individuals to join through ceremony, especially when populations needed to grow. Over time, this fluidity gave rise to clans. Groups connected not just by blood, but by common ancestry, real or mythological. Your clan totem, like a bear, eagle, or wolf, became your symbol, passed down through generations. It wasn't just about who you were. It was about where you came from. Roles within the tribes weren't chaotic free. They had structure. Each person had a role, and these roles were often based on age, skill, and experience. Let's break it down. Hunters, typically male, skilled in tracking, stealth, and teamwork. Gatherers, often women and children, who knew plants, roots, fruits, and safe edibles. Toolmakers, crafted weapons, blades, and clothing from bone, stone, and hide. Elders held knowledge of seasons, animal behavior, traditions, and healing. Healers, shamans, spiritual leaders who guided rituals and treated sickness. Children, learners, mimicking the adults and absorbing the tribe's culture. But here's the catch. These roles were flexible in times of need. A gatherer could hunt. A hunter could care for children. Adaptability was key, and everyone had one unspoken job: keep the tribe alive. The power of storytelling. With no books, no internet, and no schools, how did tribes pass on knowledge? Storytelling. By firelight. Elders shared tales of great hunts, legendary ancestors' spirits. In the forest, warnings about poison plants, lessons about love, loss, and survival. These weren't just for entertainment. They were instruction manuals for life. A story about a trickster animal might teach cleverness. A tale about a cursed river might warn children to stay away. A heroic hunt might inspire courage in the young. Storytelling became the heartbeat of the tribe, and through it, each generation carried the wisdom of those who came before. Decision-making and leadership. So, who led these tribes? Contrary to popular myth, early human leadership wasn't always based on dominance or violence. More often, leaders were chosen for wisdom, hunting skill, fairness. Courage in danger. Leadership was earned, not inherited. And it was often temporary. If you led the hunt, you gave the orders that day. If there was conflict, a respected elder might mediate. These were egalitarian societies, where power was balanced, and voices were mostly heard. Of course, tensions arose, and when they did, the tribe could split, forming new bands and starting again elsewhere. This fluidity allowed humans to avoid long-term conflict and stay mobile. The role of women in many early tribes. Women held immense importance. They were not only gatherers, often providing the majority of the daily calories, but also healers, spiritual guides, and matriarchs. In some clans, descent was traced through the mother's line, and property or leadership passed through women. The image of the male-dominated caveman tribe is outdated and oversimplified. In reality, early human societies were often cooperative rather than hierarchical, and both men and women played vital, respected roles. Intertribal relationships. No tribe existed in isolation forever. Eventually, humans began to encounter other groups, and this led to trade, marriage alliances. Territorial disputes. War for trade might involve rare stones for tools, dried meats, or salt, decorative shells, spiritual items like beads or bones. Marriage between tribes wasn't just romantic, it was political. It built trust, reduced conflict, and expanded genetic diversity. But when resources ran low, or land was contested, violence erupted. Weapons like spears, clubs, and slings weren't just for animals. Skull fractures, embedded projectiles, and burned shelters in the archaeological record show that warfare, though less frequent than in later civilizations, was part of life. Tribes had to learn not just how to survive nature, but how to survive each other. The emergence of clans and alliances. As populations grew, tribes split and multiplied, but many remained linked by clan identity. A clan was like an umbrella. Multiple families who shared a common ancestor, real or legendary, a symbol or animal totem. Shared rituals and myths. Over time, clans formed alliances for mutual defense, trade, and seasonal gatherings. Imagine vast plains or riverbanks filled with hundreds of people, sharing songs, exchanging goods, celebrating the sun or moon. These were proto-societies, loose networks of related clans, cooperating without a central government. And they laid the groundwork for villages, and eventually, civilizations. Seasonal migration and tribal territories. Early tribes didn't live in one place forever. They followed animal herds, plant cycles, weather patterns. Spiritual calendars. Each tribe had territories, not owned with fences, but understood through generational memory. This river bend is where the fish spawn. That cave is where the ancestors are buried. The plains bloom with berries in summer. Violating another tribe's territory could lead to negotiation, trade, or conflict. Over time, these migratory paths became sacred routes, marked by carvings, cairns, or symbols passed from one generation to the next. The land wasn't just useful, it was alive with meaning. Art and identity. As tribes settled more regularly, art flourished not just for ritual, but for identity. Tribes marked themselves with body paint tattoos, or scarification jewelry made of bone, shell, or teeth. Tools and clothing, these weren't just decorations. They told a story. A mark on the forehead might show you were a hunter. A necklace might mark you as part of the Bear Clan. Painted patterns on the skin could protect you in battle or in childbirth. Art became personal language. A way to say, this is who I am, this is who we are. The social contract. Every tribe, even without written laws, had a code. Unspoken rules. Don't steal from your kinshare. What you hunt, protect. The weak honor, the dead obey, the elders punish betrayal. Those who broke these rules faced banishment, the most severe punishment of all. Be cast out was to lose, not just protection, but identity. In a world where survival depended on the group, belonging was everything. This was the first human social contract, a mutual understanding that we are stronger together. Conclusion. The spark of society. From scattered bands of foragers, we became tribes. From tribes, we became clans, networks, and eventually nations. But it all started here, in the forests, plains, and caves where early humans learned to live together. They didn't just survive nature, they survived each other. Through cooperation, through shared memory, through ritual, respect, and reciprocity. The first human societies were not built with bricks, but with trust. And from that trust, we began the long, winding journey to everything we know today. Law, art, family, culture, civilization. It was never about being the strongest, it was about being the most connected. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived in a world shaped by stone. We chipped it, sharpened it, built with it, fought with it. Stone was our survival. But then suddenly, by historical standards, everything changed. The Stone Age came to an end, and with it, the lives of early humans were transformed forever. This chapter isn't just about tools or timelines. It's about a revolution, a moment when humanity took its biggest leap forward yet, and the world would never be the same. A quiet ending, a thunderous beginning. Historians divide the Stone Age into three major periods. Paleolithic, the Old Stone Age, hunter-gatherers, cave-dwellers, fire, and flint. Mesolithic, the Middle Stone Age, refinement of tools, development of fishing, and semi-permanent shelters. Neolithic, the New Stone Age, agriculture, pottery, and the first villages. Is the Neolithic Revolution, beginning around 10,000 BCE, that marks the true end of the Stone Age. This wasn't just a change in tools, it was a shift in everything. Where we lived, what we ate, how we thought, how we related to the world. Let's break down what happens, step by step. The agricultural revolution, the moment that changed it all. Farming. Somewhere in the Fertile Crescent, modern-day Iraq, Syria, Turkey, humans figured out something radical. They could plant seeds and grow food. No more wandering in search of berries. No more chasing herds across the tundra. They began cultivating wheat, barley, lentils, and later rice and maize in other parts of the world. It was slow at first. Farming was harder than hunting. Crops could fail. Weather was unpredictable. But farming offered one thing nomadic life never could. Security. A stable food source meant people could stay in one place. And once they did, they started building the first villages with fields to tend and harvests to protect. Humans stopped roaming, and they started to settle. Imagine it, a clearing beside a river. Small huts made of mud and straw, stone-lined fire pits, grain stored in clay jars, livestock penned nearby. These were the first villages like Catalyuk in modern-day Turkey, or Jericho in the Levant. Populations grew. Tools became more sophisticated. People specialized, some farmed, some crafted. Some oversaw the spiritual health of the group. This was the beginning of permanent society. From stone to clay, bone to metal, with settled life came new materials and new innovations. Pottery, clay, vessels for storing food and water. Plows, pulled by hand or animals, tilling fields faster, grinding stones, turning grain into flour for early breads and porridge. Textiles, wool and flax, spun into thread, and woven into cloth. Copper, eventually replacing stone as the primary tool and weapon material. We were leaving behind the Stone Age, entering what historians call the Chalcolithic Copperstone Age, a bridge to the full Bronze Age. But technology wasn't the only thing evolving. So was the human mind. the birth of religion and ritual as humans began to control their environment, weathering droughts. Praying for harvests, they turned increasingly towards spiritual forces. In Neolithic sites, archaeologists find shrines with figurines of fertility goddesses, animal skulls arranged ceremonially, paintings depicting the cycles of the sun, moon, and seasons, burials where the dead are laid in fetal positions, often with tools or food. These weren't just rituals. They were belief systems, early forms of religion. Life was now cyclical, not nomadic. Birth, growth, harvest, death, rebirth, and humans began to see themselves as part of a greater rhythm, connected not just to each other, but to the very forces of nature. The rise of inequality, but with settlement, came something new and not entirely welcome: inequality. In the Stone Age, tribes shared everything to survive, but in farming societies, some people began to accumulate more land, more livestock, more grain, more power. Leaders emerged not just of families, but of entire villages. Some people had homes on higher ground, better tools, more resources. Others worked the land and received less. The seeds of class were sown. This shift laid the groundwork for social hierarchies, ruling classes, and eventually kings. It's one of the greatest paradoxes of history. As life became easier, it also became more unfair. War and wars. Early nomads fought, yes, but often over short-term resources or disputes. Settled life changed that now there were villages to defend, grain to steal, territory to conquer, and so began the age of war. Archaeologists have found walled cities with watchtowers, graves of warriors with arrowheads embedded in bone layers in ancient settlements, signs of destruction, mass graves, some with signs of organized slaughter, the peaceful image of farming life. It had a dark side. Humans had learned how to create, but they'd also learned how to destroy. The domestication of animals alongside crops. Humans began taming animals. Dogs had already been domesticated during the Paleolithic, our earliest companions. But now came goats and sheep for milk, wool, and meat, cattle for labor, and hides, pigs for meat, chickens for eggs. Husbandry changed everything, provided more food, enabled transport, and farming allowed for new materials like wool, leather, and bones. We were no longer at the mercy of nature. We were beginning to shape it. Trade networks and expansion. With villages came excessive, more food than needed, more tools than used, and with excess came trade. Early humans began forming networks, exchanging obsidian for tools, shells for ornament, salt for preserving meat, beets for decoration, copper and tin for early metallurgy. Rivers became trade highways. Footpaths became routes between communities, and cultures began to blend, sharing technologies, stories, and even gods. This was the dawn of globalization, thousands of years before the term even existed. Writing, the final blow to the Stone Age. There was one invention that truly ended the Stone Age. It was this: writing. The earliest writing wasn't poetry or philosophy, it was accounting. Farmers needed to track how much grain was stored, who owed whom, what was traded when to plant, and harvest. Symbols etched into clay tablets became the first scripts, like Sumerian cuneiform, around 3200 BCE. And with writing came history. Because now, for the first time, humans weren't just telling stories, they were recording them. The veil of prehistory began to lift. The Stone Age was officially over. What we left behind, and what we gained. The end of the Stone Age was both a beginning and a farewell. We left behind the freedom of the wild, the closeness of small tribes, a deep connection to nature, the shared, equal struggle for survival, and we gained food security, permanent homes, technology, trade, writing, society. But we also gained inequality, war, power struggles, disease from crowded living. It was a complicated victory. The human spirit endures, yet through all this transformation, something remained constant. The human spirit, the drive to explore, to connect, to question, to dream. From chipped flint to bronze swords, from cave fires to temple altars, from scattered tribes to bustling cities. The journey from the Stone Age to civilization is the greatest story ever lived. And it all began when someone struck two stones together and saw a spark. Final words: UVA traveled through time with us, from the first humans stumbling into fire, two tribes shaping identity, to the birth of agriculture and the fall of the Stone Age. We hope this documentary lit a fire of curiosity inside you, because even though that ancient world is long gone, its spirit lives on in every story, every tool, every civilization that followed. We are the descendants of those who dared to light the first flame. And that story is still being written.